Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is one that I've really been looking forward to recording for a very long time. So I'm really excited to bring this to you today. Unfortunately, it's on a topic that's become much more important in our world, and that is about cancer. But the good news is that my guest is, well, she's an exceptional human being in this area, and I'm really looking forward to you guys meeting her, getting to know her, and being introduced to her work, because hopefully it's not you, but if anybody in your circle is affected by cancer, this is a very, very, I don't know, I think it's just a very important episode. So before we jump into that, of course, I want to thank you guys for being here, and thank you for the comments, the reviews, all of it. It's just amazing and really helpful. And honestly, it's what helps the podcast reach more people and grow. So the one invitation I will extend to you today is to, if you haven't already done so, definitely sign up for the newsletter, because we've now instituted a new thing with the newsletter where when you sign up with it, you basically get like a little mini course on setting the terrain for success in your biohacking journey. And specifically, I framed it around bioregulators, but this is a 7-step email chain that actually will give you a lot of information around all of the foundational stuff that we talk about all the time. So hopefully that interests you. If it does, head over to natnidham.com, and at the top of the page, you'll see a red bar which says sign up for the newsletter here. You can sign up for the newsletter, and then we can keep in touch, and we will then have newsletters coming to you. This first series, you'll get a couple of newsletters a week, and then my regular newsletter comes out on Sundays, and on occasion, you'll get another one during the week. All right, let's talk a little bit about this episode. Now, if you've ever wondered if there's more to cancer treatment than just chemotherapy and radiation, which you probably have because you're a listener of this podcast, and we know that there was always more to the story, in this longevity podcast episode, I get to talk to my friend and honestly a woman I've looked up to for so many years, Dr. Nasha Winters, to discuss the often overlooked mental and emotional aspects of healing from cancer. But we don't just talk about that. Dr. Winters is a stage 4 ovarian cancer survivor of over 30 years, and she shares her incredible journey and the unconventional approach that transformed her health and career. We discuss the concept of 10 drops in the bucket, factors that contribute to cancer development and overall health, including genetics, metabolism, toxins, microbiome, immune system. The list goes on. We also dive into an integrative approach. So it's not, we talk about mindset, we talk about all of the things in the mind, but we also talk about a brass tacks integrative approach, combining the best of conventional and alternative treatments tailored to each individual's needs. The concept of metronomic chemotherapy, which plays with dosing and timing, which may potentially reduce side effects while maintaining efficacy. We even talk about psychedelic therapy and so much more. Dr. Nasha Winters, like I said, I consider her a friend. She's a gem of a human being. She is also an integrative oncology specialist. She's the author of The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, as well as Mistletoe and the Emerging Future of Integrative Oncology. She's the host of the Metabolic Matters podcast and the executive director of the nonprofit organization, the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health, where she trains other practitioners to do what she does. So you can find out more about her by going to her website, which is drnasha.com. Nasha is Nasha, and her podcast is Metabolic Matters. And now let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Dr. Nasha Winters, welcome to the show.
Girl, it is so about time we're finally doing this together. So I'm very excited to be here with you and all of your amazing followers.
Oh, well, I'm totally stoked, you guys. I was just trying to restrain myself. We've been chattering for the last few minutes, and I finally had to stop us from talking and say, okay, you know what? We actually need to hit record. But yeah, Dr. Nasha Winters is you're just an exceptional human being. And I always adore being in your presence. So this is a treat because, when you hang out at any of the places that you'll find Dr. Nasha at, she's surrounded by people. So you don't, it's hard to get time. So now I actually get undivided time with you for like a whole hour. This is so exciting.
So cool. And by the way, folks, the same thing is true. You can't get within a 10-foot radius of Natalie at these events either. So just FYI, it is nice to have this one-on-one. We were joking before she started recording that we should have always had like a record button with us because the conversations are effortless and go all over the map. So this will be interesting today.
Oh yeah, this will be a ride. Buckle up. So to put framework and context into the ride,
Sure.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story? I think a lot of people know who you are, but maybe in the audience there's some people who are like, who is this Nasha person? So tell us a little bit about Dr. Nasha. And
I love it. Well, thank you. Well, a lot of us show up in the world of medicine based on our own sort of pain to purpose experience. It's not like I woke up one day and thought, gosh, I really think a career in oncology and career in cancer is going to be a really delightful path to choose in this lifetime. That wasn't how this began. And so, like probably most other people in my field and fields of integrative medicine in general, I had a plethora of health issues. And by the time I was at the age of 19 diagnosed with an end-stage terminal ovarian cancer diagnosis, everyone for the months leading up to that just thought it was more of the same, more of my IBS, more of my endometriosis, more of my polycystic ovarian syndrome, more of my rheumatoid arthritis. Later to learn, I also had celiac and Hashimoto's and other collection of lovely little autoimmune and co-infection processes all on board. I didn't even know. I'd gotten to the place of such complacency in my own health. I did not even believe I was unhealthy. Imagine that. In fact, people today,
with all those things going on.
Exactly. Because our world normalizes it. There's a medication for that. So you're fine. Just take a pill and you're fine. Go on with life. Ignore, bury, you're fine. And so, I mean, even just a little TMI, I think this is just to land the point of this. As a infant and toddler, my concerned mother took me to the pediatrician wondering why I would have a bowel movement only once a month, if that. And
that was a good concern.
Right. That's a valid concern. And the pediatrician told my mother. And so this didn't get changed until I was about 11 or 12 years old. So for another decade, I endured this. But they just said, well, that's just her pattern. So that's totally normal.
Get out.
So I was already put on lots of GI medications as a little kid, like basically at that time, baby Prilosec vibe. I had started menstruating at 9. So they put me on birth control pills, which in the late 1970s, because I had severe endometriosis diagnosed 2 years after that. Like all the patterns, my IBS, they put me on just like living on digestive medications. And, but no one thought that was weird. That's just like, you just need a pill for that. So apparently I just had like Prilosec deficiency or birth control pill deficiency in their mind's eye. And so that's what kind of led up to. Now, as someone who was then diagnosed with this terminal illness, I didn't expect to live, nor did they. I mean, I was months from death. I was, completely end-stage organ failure, complete bowel blockage, tumors all over inside my entire abdomen and ovary. And it was just this moment that instead of me thinking I was going to fight it, I just wanted to understand why. Because it was such a surprise, which is so weird. And just so your listeners know, everyone who comes to me today still says, I was healthy until I got cancer. And so I'm highlighting my own story to say, guys, that's impossible. We're like that frog in the hot water, Natalie. It's like you started on cold and you turn up the temperature slowly. And over time, you just adjust. And then finally, you're boiled.
Yeah. It's so funny. I interviewed someone yesterday. I don't know if you've heard of, do you know who Andrea Nakayama is? You heard of her?
Did she write the book about autoimmunity?
Possibly. I know she's written a book. Anyway, cool. We talked about this exact thing about how people, anyone who's been a practitioner in the space knows how powerful our power as humans is for normalizing dis-ease, not disease, but dis-ease, because it's just who you are. It's just the way I am. That doctor should be stripped of their license, the first one. I'm sorry.
And many that followed suit, by the way.
I'm sure many that followed, but that in particular is quite impressive.
Well played.
Well, there's other words, but they might offend people. And unfortunately, anyway, I'm not going to go there. Yeah. But this whole idea of how we become, this head of ours and our mind and our brain becomes so disconnected from everything that happens below. And maybe in some cases, like in your case, where there's so much discomfort and so much going on, it's like, I got stuff to do.
Yeah. It was a survival mechanism.
You're a kid. You're like, I got to go out with my friends. I got to do shit. Like, I got things to do. I'm not going to just sit here and be sick.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. And that's just it. It's like you just bite the leather strap and push forward. And because of what you just spoke about, the normalization of it as well, no one questions it, including you, the patient. And so I just think that's just a really interesting process that, I might be highlighting my experience as to why I'm in this field today, but it is the experience of virtually every single client I've ever consulted with, directly or indirectly through their, healthcare provider. So it's just an interesting discussion to have today, I think now today more than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's huge. So 19 years old, like that's mind-bending. And it is, what's also quite mind-bending to me is that at 19 years old, you have the presence of mind to sit there and say, okay, what do you mean? Like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
And so then what?
Yeah.
Then what did you do?
Well, I think you speaking to that, like at 19, just so listeners know, this is a little vulnerable and transparent, but I really didn't have a reason to live before that. And in fact, had tried to take my life on multiple occasions. So there was a flash, a moment that with this diagnosis, there was a moment of like relief of, oh, here's a beautiful exit strategy. I don't have to off myself. The cancer will do it for me. Like there was this fleeting moment, but then almost like right on its heels, as quickly as I could almost get that full thought manifested. This other thought was when they said there's nothing can be done, you need to go home, get your affairs in order. We can't even offer you a single dose of treatment because your organs are in failure and it will backfire and kill you right out. At that point, when I was told there was absolutely no way, I apparently had the double dog dare gene, which then flipped something else on inside of me, which I'd always had this tendency. My mom will tell you I was always a contrarian. If someone said it can't be done, I would just do it. The sky is blue, I would tell you it was green and fight to the end of the earth for that. And so that moment, that sort of, it can't be done, you're screwed, this is over, did something inside of me that said, well, okay, if I'm going to die, if there is truly nothing I can do, at least I'll go out on my own terms. At least I'll go out understanding. And so it lit something inside of me that created curiosity that wasn't there before. And so accidentally, that curiosity kept kicking the can down the road a little bit further. And suddenly I'm a few months past my expiration date, a year past my expiration date, 5 years past my expiration date, 10. Now we are 32 and a half years past my expiration date at this discussion. Standard of care would still likely not tell me I'm 100% no evidence of disease, but I have lived well and managed this process in my body along with a whole collection of many others for decades. My health at 52 is far better than it was at 19, for sure, better than my early 20s because I was still figuring a lot out. Improved even more in my 30s. My 40s were a little bit bumpy as I started to move into the perimenopause window, as it was like, oh, this is like a bucking bronco, change course, rest, pivot as needed. But now on the other side, it's like, whew, first of all, to achieve natural menopause in my family of origin is unheard of. I'm a first. I'm a first to make it this far with all my bits.
Come on.
No.
So
I'm the eldest of 11 cousins, and I'm still like the last survivor with my own breast, my own thyroid, my own uterus, my own ovaries. That's a weird one.
So that's nutty. So is there a possibility? Whoa, that's a bit mind blowing. Yeah. So is there a possibility that there's some genetic information that's kind of askew in your family tree somewhere? Well, given that piece, just not the fact that, I mean, already as a 19-year-old, getting that kind of diagnosis is pretty impressive. But given your history from the time you were tiny, maybe not. Like, who knows, right? Like, cancer is a crazy thing. It evolves out of, people are still trying to figure it out. Sure. But But having said that, given that in your family tree of 11 cousins, you are the eldest and the only one to, I mean, it would be one thing if you were the youngest, but as the oldest, not to mention with the diagnosis you got, by the way, that you still have those parts.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's interesting because it wasn't until 1996 that I enrolled in a trial at that time to be tested for a particular mutation. No one was talking about what that mutation was. They were collecting blood from people who were young adults, pediatrics and young adults with cancer history. Or strong family history of cancer. And so I signed up, I got tested, and I got the note that, hey, you're positive. Now we do genetic counseling. And this is early on. This is at the way early first murmurings of the concept of the BRCA gene mutation. So, of course, back then, it was sort of like getting the BRCA mutation diagnosis was just sort of like in the 1980s being diagnosed with AIDS. Like you just sort of have this belief system, it's a death sentence.
And you're going to go get your bits chopped off.
Exactly. And yet what we've also learned, I mean, there are lots of people alive and thriving with AIDS, not just HIV positive, but also with AIDS. We've also learned that a BRCA diagnosis of a BRCA 1 or 2 mutation is not a death sentence. In fact, just so your listeners know, it's less than 5% of all cancer types have this mutation. All right. And simply put, it's a mutation, but it's a mutation that you have the power to override its expression or lack thereof. So BRCA is actually a non-expressed gene. So when it's working properly, it's DNA repairing. When it's not working properly, you are very vulnerable to DNA damage. Those are some things we've learned. We know that it's about how you methylate. Now, that's probably a big word you talk about in this community all the time, right? So what I understood, partially because I'm married to a crazy biochemist, and this is what we do for fun in my household, is talk about things like this. My husband, Steve, helped me understand that BRCA is just a methylation problem. So work on your methylation. And I'd been a long time vegan and vegetarian at that time. I was completely void of all my methyl donor support. And so I started adding in B12. I started really changing these things up. I started making these changes. So again, I want folks to listen that this was not something I just went, this is what you do. I got it all figured out. It was a non-linear, long-term, like in and out, all over the map, living laboratory experience for me to learn and learn a few tricks along the way. But I did learn early on that BRCA was just simply like, okay, Nasha, you got to take a little better care of your terrain to prevent this from going any further.
I want you to go back to the part where you said that the BRCA gene has a function.
Yeah.
Because people need to hear this.
Right.
We need to hear that what we call these mutations are actually variants.
Yes.
And they have a function.
Yep.
And admittedly, with this variant of this gene that has a purpose, that it's when things go sideways that then it gets flipped to its evil twin. If we want to call it that, right? Great
description. Yeah. And so that's just it, that we all, the BRCA, this BRCA gene, oncogene, is very, 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 its only function is to DNA repair. Like that's its job. So this is like when everything is flowing right and you're giving the body all the tools, all the precursors, you're removing any obstacles to cure, you're avoiding things like ionizing radiation, which is incredibly destructive to the DNA. You're avoiding things that will damage your DNA further. Knowing that you have that vulnerability says, probably don't wear your cell phone in your bra or in your back pocket.
By the way, nobody should, but
exactly, yes. Right? But this one in particular, because it's so sensitive to ionizing radiation. So knowing that piece. But then the other thing is that when folks go, I was born with this, I have this gene, so therefore my grandmother, my aunts, my mom, my sisters, all of them have had breast cancer. I'm like, well, then how about you stop that with you?
Yeah.
You have the power to change the way you methylate. So you might have this roadblock to your DNA repair, but there are a lot of workarounds to help repair, support, and override that DNA damage repair mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. And so BRCA is just one way to do that. There's multiple ways in which we can come around and repair the DNA. And so that is all through our diet and our lifestyle, period.
It's
It's not
crazy.
a prophylactic removal of body parts. It's not getting on a prophylactic aromatase inhibitor or a prophylactic PARP inhibitor. This is something that is in your wheelhouse to do something about. Because what happens if you go and hack away the body parts and get on those medications, you are not addressing the environment that gave rise to this expression that created vulnerability to a downstream effect that could become a cancering process.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And how different would women's mindset be if
And
it,
men's. I mean,
and then,
this,
I mean, anybody who
yeah,
gets this diagnosis,
yeah,
how different would it be if they were told, okay, here's this BRCA gene, you do have it,
yeah.
and
Something
here's what it's doing for you right now.
Yeah,
Here's the other pieces of the puzzle
yeah,
that are contributing.
yeah.
So if we can plug A, B, and C,
Right.
you're good. And you know what you just said, which is so powerful, and I think we keep forgetting, is that the human body, and probably every animal's bodies, really has so much redundancy built into it. Like we don't
Exactly.
rely on one single pathway to do one thing.
Exactly.
And this is why, you know, in the time that I studied epigenetics and genetics, you would see people on paper who had a gene for whatever,
Right.
right? But they're not showing up as whatever. And it's like, you know, that 98% junk DNA, we don't know what that 98% junk DNA, like there's so much else going on, right? And so many backdoors and alternative pathways. I mean, the body couldn't exist the way that it does if it relied on a single thing to do one thing.
Exactly. It just, to me, it's just the miracle of who we are.
Yeah.
You know, and if we start to understand these concepts and not be a victim to an ideology, because really the medical emergency of a cancer diagnosis is the actual diagnosis itself.
Mm.
And I mean that very specifically of the moment you hear those words, you have cancer, all alarms go.
Yeah.
You are in a cortisol flooded, epinephrine, norepinephrine flooded, parasympathetic shutdown, run from the saber-toothed tiger environment,
Yeah.
which that is in and of itself one of the most profound signaling molecules or collection of molecules to tell cancer to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. You've opened the floodgates.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, so in that moment, this is your opportunity to say, this is information. This diagnosis is just information. Now I get curious as to what was in my biography or my biology that led me to this moment. And with that knowledge of understanding what brought me here, I then will know what tools or further testing or next steps to take to get me to the next point on this journey. Mm-hmm. And so if people can come back and be more in a rest and digest and metabolize this information state, collection of information state, and a responsive state versus a reactive state, right then and there, your outcomes already are improved compared to the average person met with this diagnosis.
Well, if you think about it, when you get any piece of bad news,
right.
like any piece of really bad news,
yeah.
you shut down.
Yeah.
Right. You stop thinking. You can't think. Your heart gets tight.
Yeah.
You get, you know, that pit of your stomach thing happens.
Yeah.
It's like your brain shuts off.
Totally.
You can't, and it's like, you know, it's not a good place to be.
Right.
So tell us, like, you know, how do people manage? Because, you know, intellectually, people might be listening to this and going, all right, okay, I got it. I mean, I don't know how many people are going, yeah, good luck with that, but whatever.
Right.
But then what? Like, because the person sitting across the desk from you who is truly,
their heart is in the right place.
Devastated. Yeah, their heart is broken. You know, if they have an ounce of empathy, they are killing themselves right now for having to give you this news. They've told you, I'm so sorry, whatever they've been able to say to you. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that person is going to be the person who's going to be walking down this path with you. And I love the way you put it, like kicking the can down the path, because it's kind of like a one day at a time thing, at least initially, right?
Exactly. And even 32 years out, it's still a one day at a time process, because we aren't the same. Like, we aren't the same person we were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Our physiology, our organs, our tissues, our cells, we are constantly regenerating. And we also have the ability to rewire new neural pathways. We have the ability to reframe our perceptions, our belief systems, our understandings, which can be leveraged to support you, or frankly, leveraged to hinder you. And that becomes a place of choice, but you don't have that choice until you have awareness. And so unfortunately, a lot of people just may not even be aware that they're living in that constant state of stress and duress. And so with that piece here, let's say you're hearing this for the first time. Again, I kind of mentioned, like, stop, take a breath. The lucky thing for me, and this always trips people out, the lucky thing for me back in 1991 when this happened, there was no Dr. Google. There were no podcasts. There were no influencers.
Yeah.
First of all, I didn't know anybody. Like, I knew my grandfather died of cancer. I heard murmurings of other people in my family had cancer. It would still take another 10, 15 years into my own cancer diagnosis for all the cancer people to come out of the closet, because there was a lot of shame around this diagnosis. Yeah. Trippy. Like, oh, that's right. I remember she had a little spell of something in her womb, like all the things. You're like, that could have been helpful information. Like, it would have been very empowering information, but it was like, to learn those things along the way, there was nobody else in my circle, my sphere, that themselves had cancer, or their parents or loved ones or somebody close. I was a sophomore in college. I didn't know anybody.
I was going to say, you were 19 years old. Like, you don't know people with cancer at that age. I mean, you just don't.
Yeah. So there was no one to lean into. And especially still, even today, but especially back in 1991, cancer was a disease of the aged. This is why it was missed in me, because I was the zebra. So I can't really fault the doctors for where we were, plus the technologies, the information we had at that time, the testing. We didn't have all the stuff we have today. So of course, retrospect is amazing, but we didn't have that back then. And so for me, though, I think the big piece is because I was told there's nothing you can do. There's no way. And there were no resources. I had to go inside.
That's incredible. I mean, that is incredible. Yeah. I'm just going to say, being a contrarian totally pays off for you at this point, because 90% of the rest of the world would be like, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go bungee jumping and drink my ass off. Like, whatever.
Well, there was even a flash of that. And now I think I can say this to your group, but in fact, 2 weeks after my diagnosis, because I landed in the hospital 2 weeks before my 20th birthday, the official diagnosis didn't come. So my birthday is September 30th. My official diagnosis didn't come till the 21st of October, because that's just how long it took back then. But on my 20th birthday, I was supposed to have this big blowout party, because it's the 20th birthday. I'm in college. I'm living on my own. I've got a great roommate, all the things. But what was super, it's like, hi, see, God's calling us right now. But what was super wild about that, I canceled the party because there was no like cell phones and whatnot. So weirdly, hours into the evening of that night, I was very mopey, feeling sorry for myself. My roommate, Chad, at the time, so this is very interesting. This is in 1981. My roommate, Chad, had AIDS. It was a big secret. I was the only person who knew. Oh. And so Chad was also the only person I told of my diagnosis, because I knew I was carrying something heavy for him. He was going to carry something heavy for me. So we had each other's back. So that night we pretty much sat around moping and feeling sorry for ourselves. And then there was a knock at the door at about 11 o'clock at night. And in walks these three guys that I waited tables at a restaurant in town. They showed up with a bottle of tequila and a bag of weed, and like, here we go. And I'm like, I'm definitely not in the mood for that. Just was like not into it. And they knew I was in a down space. Like, you have to have a birthday, because they didn't get them, they didn't know I'd canceled the party. And they threw on the table, hey, well then we can go to our friend's house. He's got a bunch of mushrooms. We're from Kansas. I've never even smoked a joint at that time. Never had a shot of tequila. I was like, at that point,
Well, let's skip the joint and the tequila and just jump right in. Mushrooms.
Totally. But what was so funny, we go to this guy's house. They pull up a freezer. They pull out all these baggies on a countertop, and I see all these, like, now I understand, like an eighth baggie filled, crammed, fat with mushrooms. They're over talking at the sink, and I'm like, what do you do with these? Like, oh, you eat them. So I have no clue
You started snacking on mushrooms?
I just opened up the baggie and just started eating the entire baggie. And so by the time they kind of turned around and realized what was going on, I had like 3 little stems left in the baggie. And they were like, you could like see that moment like, no. And so today I can retrospectively understand that I accidentally we figured I took between 9 and 11 grams. So beyond a heroic dose. And this is something I could never talk about. So thanks to Michael.
Maybe that's why.
Well, honestly, not like, because my belief system, my perception, my belief that there was even a different way that I even could survive, it just didn't exist. The family of origin in which I grew up, the trauma in which I grew up, the poverty in which I grew up, the lack of education in which I grew up. I'm the only person to go to college in my family, for crying out loud. Like all these things. If your listeners know about the ACE score, the adverse childhood event score, I was a 10 out of 10. It's like there was literally no hope. There were no resources, no hope. There was no equanimity. There was no equality. And so for me, it was like, F it. Who cares? And so I inhaled that entire bag, or just shy of it that night, and went on the ride of my life. Literally, I did go through a dying process that night, and people who've taken medicines might know. But it popped through. It literally rewired my entire brain. And so it wasn't a surprise that, all like 20 years later, I was sending patients that I did not share this story with, by the way. The story stayed very private until Michael Pollan brought us all out of the closet, was sending patients to the Hopkins trial with the plant medicines for end-of-life care. And so I had 11 patients, all with stage 4 ovarian cancer, which had also been my diagnosis, who were all on hospice. They were all hospice eligible, less than 6 months to live. They were all going to basically face and deal with their mortality. That was in 2010 and 2011. All but one of those are still here today. And the other one didn't even die of ovarian cancer.
No.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother conversation. I've presented this in some medical environments to talk about what I believe is happening there. But there is a lot of research and discussion now in the oncology space of where these plant medicines have utility to help change. And the biggest feedback I got from every one of those women, and since then I've facilitated retreats for other patients with cancer using different various medicines, and I've facilitated retreats for doctors using various medicines to help understand, because the burnout rate and the torture of carrying the load of so many others that are dying around you makes you want to die. It just does. And so for people to face their mortality with different information, different tools, different resources, different awarenesses, perceptions, belief systems, that is what this medicine offers and offered. And that's the feedback I got, that people said, wow, I'm not afraid to die. So what happens in my world, in the cancer world, people are so consumed by fear of cancer, fear of the diagnosis, fear of death, that they literally stop living.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that right there is, if a patient, my litmus test for someone is, how deep down the fear rabbit hole are you? Mm-hmm. Can we get you out of there with a lot of different tools? A lot of them comes from our biohacking community, right?
Yeah.
Can we get you there, just good therapy and whatnot? Or do we need to consider another inroad, which could be some of these psychedelic medicines? So I don't start with that. Today in our day and age, people want to start with that. And by the way, if your nervous system is not wired and you're not regulating, your nervous system is not self-regulating, you cannot tolerate even the psychedelics. It can backfire very bad. So I want to put that for a word of caution.
Thank you. How would people know that? How would they know?
You are just so, like, first of all, if you're just even petrified to do these medicines, please listen to yourself.
Yeah. Follow your gut.
I feel like I should, because every influencer and their dog is doing it right now, but you're terrified. Trust that. Do some more work first. Go and make some room and some space in your nervous system so that you can actually receive the medicine and the message that medicine is offering. That's number one. Like for me that night, it pushed me through, and this is not a recommendation at all. It pushed me through the place of, I have had total nervous system dysregulation, and it popped me up through that glass ceiling and beyond. And then it still took me, I still feel like I'm integrating that information from, September 30th of 1991, for crying out loud. And so I definitely don't recommend that. But I also immediately thereafter ended up in the hands of an acupuncturist. I ended up in the hands of a homeopath, and I ended up in hands of somebody doing EMDR work. And I'm pretty sure if I had not had that to basically start to bring all of my fragmented self back, I might have died happily because I had a different feeling, but I would not have come back into a different construct. So I kind of tell people I've got my pre-cancer life and my post-cancer life, and I would never go back to my pre-cancer life. Ever. It's impossible. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we went on a little tangent. You're welcome.
I love it. Listen, but this is it. You know, I said to Nasha when we started, so what do we want to talk about? She's like, well, I don't know. We're going to say this. And we're like, yeah, you know what? We're just going to turn the mic on and see where we end up. That is, which neither of us really thought we were going to end up here, but here we are. But this is a fascinating place. So at what point, so basically the acupuncturist, the EMDR, and the other therapist, I forget, homeopath, those three people basically took the fragments of Nasha that were out there from her big mushroom adventure, and brought and allowed you to kind of integrate and almost like reassemble yourself into this new iteration of you, because you would have let go of so many, upgrade for sure. But you would have had to have let go of so much to be, to have room for the next, whatever the next thing was going to be.
Yeah. And I think that's I love that. I think that to even take that on further with anybody listening, no matter what, you don't need plant medicines to understand, you need to make room within yourself for healing. If you're consumed with resentment, fear, rage, grief, there is no room for joy. There is no room for love. The antidote of those are those things. So give yourself an opportunity. As Rumi says, the wound, the wound is where the light enters. So acknowledge those places of resentment or rage or betrayal or whatever, but know them as an inroads of light that can be the balm to transform that energy in your body. As esoteric as that is, my diagnosis changed me from a pre-med chemistry biology major to a pre-med psychology major with a biology minor, and basically a self-constructed major into this concept known as psychoneuroimmunology, PNI. So that's what shifted me. I took the rest of that first semester of my sophomore year off to basically get my affairs in order and die. And then when January came around, I'm like, I might as well go back to school, right? So, what else am I going to do? I've got some scholarships and I might as well use them up. Like there was like crazy mindset, it was like,
go to class.
Right, exactly. So go to class, go work at Detox. I worked at so funny. Like I was working grave shifts at Detox. I was working grave shifts at a nursing home. I was waiting tables until 11 o'clock at night and going out and drinking with all my colleagues after work until 3 a.m, getting up and going to class at 7 a.m. Like my circadian rhythm.
I was about to say, this makes like no sense, right? But this is so
I was healthy, Natalie. I was
but here's
20-year-old.
So first of all, PNI, I just this week released the interview with Olivia Lessler on PNI. I'd never heard of PNI before her, and now here you are with it.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah. But so wait a minute. So but after the diagnosis, you're now coming in. You're screaming into that place where supposedly your ex-adore lives.
Yeah, they're like, you're not going to see New Year, right? That's what they're telling
No New Year's for you.
Yeah.
Maybe if you go to New Year's, but that'll be it. But you're not, but here's what's really interesting. And again, this is not what everybody should do. To be clear. This is Nasha's unique story. You're not taking care of yourself particularly.
No, I didn't.
You're burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah.
You're breaking all the rules because we talk about, improperly regulated circadian rhythm. You're not making melatonin. Melatonin's anti-cancer. It's this really important hormone, blah, 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 blah. And here you are, you're 52. So, but I think the point I want to make around that is that there's so much more to these outcomes than physiology.
Absolutely. And in the book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, I talk about kind of the 10 major drops that go into the mitochondrial metabolic bucket that healthy cells have a certain metabolic fingerprint and cancer cells have a particular metabolic fingerprint. And you need to treat both simultaneously. You have to treat the metabolic shift of the cancer cell in one way, and you have to support the healthy metabolic the other way. So there's a parallel path going, because standard of care is sort of like all or none, like flip the switch all the way of like full on cytotoxic, tumor reduction, eradication, which inherently takes out the good with the bad. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And alternative may be focusing more on the good, but is not also knowing how to properly target or individualize the target to the quote unquote bad. And I don't even like to use that word bad and good, because cancer is us. Cancer cells are us. They're an extension of us. They've gone offline, right? And our job is to help bring them back into balance, into the fold, into the community, right? So these top 10 drops that over my 30 plus year career of evaluating for myself and tens of thousands of patients directly and hundreds of thousands of patients indirectly through the training of clinicians and helping them apply this methodology to their patients, there are 10 main drivers. So one we've already alluded to, genetics. So the epigenetics, the above the gene. So what do you have? You might have been born with this. You might have had this blueprint and it might have been passed down from generations, but the buck stops with you. You can change that expression, So that's one of the things, but understanding your strengths and your weaknesses and, mitigating or modulating that. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox for that. So that information is very, very helpful for me as a clinician. Then we look at the metabolic drivers. So specifically, what fuel are you feeding those cells? Right? Are you feeding cells for them to proliferate, to go into an anabolic state, to grow, or are you feeding those cells to stay neutral or go into a catabolic state to regress? And so that is the place where I think pretty much everyone can agree that carbohydrates in excess are a bad idea for everybody across the board. But cancer in particular, that's its favorite fuel source. And its second favorite fuel source is glutamine, which is too much protein. And so these are the two engines for ingenuity of our cancer cells, right? And so those are the pieces that each individual will need to adjust that accordingly based on their data, their tissue assays, their blood biopsies, their single nucleotide polymorphisms, their blood testing, the cancer type, the staging of the cancer, the treatments they've endured. That's going to tell me how to adjust their diet and lifestyle very significantly. The third drop is toxins. For crying out loud, if you're living on the planet today, you are toxic. And it's just about matter of how does it interface with your personal blueprint. So the fourth good old drop in the bucket is all about your microbiome. And Natalie's been around this world long enough to know that just a few years ago, everyone ignored the importance of the microbiome. And yet now, it's winning Nobel Prizes. It's the hot research out there. We're understanding that it's impacting our immune system and our neurotransmitters, as well as our response to various treatments, medications, including and specifically in the cancer world. So it's a really big one that we assess for our patients. The immune system is the next drop in the bucket, which again, all of these things you'll notice are not like siloed. They all
depend on each other.
But just so people can understand where they're coming from. So the immune system, the next one is the inflammatory process, which, holy cow, that's a big one. The other one is our angiogenesis, but specifically circulation and perfusion of oxygen throughout the body. The next one is our hormones and how they are modulated, how they're metabolized, how they're methylated, detoxified, how they're used, like go into the receptor site and clear out of the body as they should when they're working well, instead of the jammed up information of living in an endocrine disrupting soup today. It's like the messages get broken up. It's like a bad Wi-Fi connection, right? And so there's that piece here. And then the last two are circadian rhythm and stress chemistry and mental emotional. And so you and I just dove in with everybody about the mental emotional. For me, that was sort of my accidental starting point. But I will tell you, when I wrote the book, I made that the 10th drop in the bucket, because if I introduced the mental emotional first, 99% of people would close that book and never revisit it.
Out. Yeah.
Right? So,
and yet it's got to be, it's number one. Exactly.
Because if you do all the tangibles, all the sexy biohacker things, pay for all the expensive alternative therapies, go to the best of the best, Sloan Ketterings and all the things, and you do the perfect diet, you've got your exercise dialed, you're taking all the right supplements, all the right off-label drugs, all the right IV therapies, and you are not dealing with your stress resilience, and you're that sort of neural pathways, and you're not dealing with the mental emotional, you will not get well and stay well. And so that is the crux. And even people like I don't know if you ever had Dr. Kelly Turner on your show, but she wrote a great book called Radical Remission and a follow-up book, Radical Healing.
I read that book, Radical Remission. It blew my mind.
Exactly. And specifically, our first book talked about 9 common factors of people who were thrivers that were like me, right? So I was her story of the month in September 2018, if people want to go back and read more.
Really?
So she's got thousands of these quote unquote radical remissions who were otherwise told they were going to die. Everything from cancer to other like MS and other really, really chronic, horrific conditions. And she showed at that time 9, now it's 10 factors that are in common with these thrivers. And only 3 of them are tangible. And those tangible are a dietary change. She even says it's not even specific to what, it's about just changing. Like if you've been a vegan forever, you probably should shift gears. If you've been another way forever, you should probably shift gears. We've even learned from people like Dr. Sachin Panda that maybe even the timing is more important than what, like all these pieces. It's just like awareness around changes in your diet, right? And everyone can agree that quality should be also paramount. And then the second one is supplements. So some form of supplementation. She's like, there's not even like a common denominator of what supplements are good or bad. Yeah. It's just like this I think to me, it's like a reminder of your self-care. Your cells are like, thank you for thinking about me. Thank you for loving me enough to do something. Thank you for listening to me. That's huge. And then the third is exercise. Thank you for moving this big meat suit around on the planet in a meaningful, thoughtful way. The other 7 are totally intangible. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Totally intangible. And so that's the piece that I learned for myself accidentally early on. And why I think I've helped so many patients is because we always go there. We always go there. And those patients that have the best outcomes are the ones who are willing to face all the skeletons in their closet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm trying to imagine someone listening to this who's had a diagnosis, who has cancer. And, what I want to say is take this as hope. Yeah. And, don't take this as a burden. Right. Take it as a candle. Yeah. To lead you through this path, because I do know that I know that I had a friend who had cancer, and, whenever something would come around about diet or this or that, is like, well, you can't. Somebody said to me, well, you're just blaming the patient. And I'm like, nobody's blaming the patient. There's a difference between blame and empowering and saying there are things you can do. Is it possible that your lifestyle contributed to where you are? Yeah, it is possible for sure. Yep. You didn't know. Nobody does it on purpose. So this isn't a blame game, but this is an awareness, and an empowering of things can change. Yeah.
I really appreciate you brought that up, because I get, what happens is people will, as happens in podcasting or interviews, people will take a clip. Yeah. And they'll post one thing, like just so an example of this happened yesterday, talking about nervous system dysregulation. I was interviewed at a gathering in Dallas recently, and they did one little clip. For 90 minutes, I talked to these guys, right? They took one little clip. I learned this term for the first time yesterday. It got stitched by a complete hater. Oh, no. Which took my clip to over by the time I went to bed last night, 7.3 million views. I went viral thanks to a hater, which I was like, I'm not going to look at this, because the biggest thing when I started looking at the comments was the idea that people were literally misunderstanding. They had no context. They were making judgment about one comment. They didn't even bother getting curious. That right there shows me just the collective dysregulated nervous system of our culture.
Oh, it's a thing.
And I was I will never enter into that space again, because it is a futile battle, a futile conversation, because what matters is what I know to be true in my own body, in my own being, in my own experience, in my own reality, in my own perception. And I have no control over what other people think or feel about me. And so for me, in that moment, when I could feel my nervous system start to go, I was like, not my monkey, not my circus, right? And so that moment, we choose as humans, we tend to grab on to the worst, the ugliest. What would it be like if we chose to grab onto something different?
Mm-hmm.
What if that person had stitched me and it had been about a message of hope versus a message of fear that he perpetuated?
Wow.
What ripple would that have left? That would have had far more impact for our collective good than someone tearing another human being down and dragging all of the toxic, broken nervous system, dysregulated people right back into the same cesspool that they're trying so desperately to get out of.
That is such a shame. That is such a lost opportunity.
For
I'm
everybody.
so sorry that happened.
Well, and I'm sorry, but we just hired somebody from social media because I'm terrible at these things. And she's like, Nasha, this is a good thing because it has it's got, almost 10 million views now of people that, because I spend my career speaking to a lot of the people in the choir.
Yeah. No, you're reaching.
If one person out of that 10 million said, wow, I want to hate this person, but something resonated here that's different. I'm going to get curious and I'm going to dig deeper and I'm going to get the context to this conversation and see where this takes me. That is how I try and approach every single thing I see and hear out there.
Yeah, it's a win.
It's a win for all.
Well, and if it's 10 million people, I think there'll be more than one. Who will be like, who is this crazy person? I don't know what the clip was. Who is this crazy person? And I'm going to go find more crazy stuff. And then lo and behold, here they are listening to you going, oh, wait, what?
Yeah. Okay. Now they're listening to this conversation, getting context of, I learned about this person because of this stitcher dude. And like I said, I don't even know what that means. They had to explain to me.
I don't know what stitching is either.
I still couldn't explain it to save my life. But the point is that it's so funny how quickly we wire. And so one of the people that was really instrumental in my own healing is I was following the work of Robert Ader, who's the PNI, that you just
say the PNI,
and then Candace Pert, and then later Bruce Lipton. And Bruce Lipton, I was following his work and his research. His book, Biology of Belief, did not come out until 2011, a full 10 years after my diagnosis. But his research was imparting its wisdom into my physiology, into my biochemistry, into my epigenetic expression in a profound way. His work and Mina Bissell, whose work in the 80s was all about the extracellular matrix. So it was like, this isn't a genetic disease, guys. This is like, what are those genes swimming in? And coming back to that, her work, like just such a hero in my eyes. I got so lucky stumbling across these out-of-box thinkers that now there's Nobel Prizes on a lot of their work. And there's interesting information out here where I was applying it to myself in real time long before we had double-blind, placebo, randomized controlled trials, right? And many of these, we will never have those kind of trials because they're not trialable because it's N of one. But this is where 30 some years later, my job is now to help other people get curious for why they ended up in whatever situation they're in at that moment, to test and assess. So to test, understand their patterns so that then we know them fully, to know what tools would be most helpful to change the environment and to change their perspective and to change their trajectory.
Yeah. You know what I love about this is there's no prescription.
None. Protocol.
I love and hate it.
Word in my mouth.
I love it and hate it, right? Because on one hand, I'm sure there's, again, thinking of myself on the other side of this, listening to this podcast. Okay, when is she going to get to the part where she tells me what to eat, what supplements I need to take, and what to do? And but this is right because the dreaded 2-word answer. Yeah, it depends.
Everyone hates
the answer nobody wants to hear.
Right.
Is the only answer.
Yeah,
and it's about you and where you came from.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie, for that. And that is so hard. And there's a lot of my colleagues out there in the conventional oncology space and the integrative oncology space that promote a protocol. And I'm telling you right now, your listeners, when you hear that, when you see that, I would really encourage you to go elsewhere.
Run for the hills. Yeah.
It's a red flag to me.
Yeah.
If they are not actually testing to understand why and where, what's going on with you right now, and they're not looking back at your history to understand the chronology, the biography, and the biology that led to this moment, then they have no business starting to throw shit at you for treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And then patterns, like understanding, well, is this a pattern of, what is the priority? So when we have our patients go through those 10 drops in the bucket, we have this survey. Now in the book, it's very rudimentary. It's very basic of the Terrain 10 survey, but we have another one that we'll have in the show links that takes them through a much more involved and detailed and actually categorizes, prioritizes, and gives a numeric value to. So you, the survey taker, can see what your sort of blind spots are, maybe your top 2 or 3 areas to focus on. So let's say it's metabolic, circulatory, and stress, right?
Yeah.
So if you want, you could go in and just read those 3 chapters in the book and forget everything else, because the book is a reference book. A lot of people sit down and read it from front to back. They're like, oh my God, so much information with over 300 references, the whole bit. But if you come in and digest it of like, what is my priority right now? I'm going to start here and focus here. Mm-hmm. And then any place you start is going to start to tug on the fabric of your being and start to make change.
Yeah.
So that's a really great strategy, because if you go to a therapist, they're like, you're going to get this treatment, you're going to get this treatment, this treatment, this treatment, treatment. Like, guess what? That's a guessing game. That's literally throwing everything at it and seeing what sticks and not having any idea what worked and why, not even knowing if it's actually doing anything, not even knowing if it was actually appropriate. So this methodology is all about finding the right pattern to choose the right approach at the right dose, the right duration, and the right combination, and then revisiting this iterative process of testing along the way to see if you need to pivot.
Yeah.
Any given time.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is conventional treatment ever, like, my impression of you was that you don't necessarily close the door.
Not at all.
Conventional treatment. Like, and again, now, because we've gone down this journey of what people would consider alternative. And I think that, obviously chemotherapy is extremely toxic to the body. Mm-hmm. And yet, is it possible that sometimes you just got to go there, but then it's understanding, how do we support the system on the other side of that?
Exactly. So a funny thing in my life is I've always been the outlier in both the standard of care community and the alternative community. My standard of care community thinks I'm esoteric and woo-woo, despite the fact that I could circle them for days on the science and the backup. I'm the one employing the tests that's in their research well before they adopt them into their clinical practices. I'm a huge junkie of understanding the genetics, the epigenetics, the lab values, and how to know if someone's going to have multiple drug resistance or excess side effects, or their pharmacogenomics doesn't align with that medication. Like, bring it, right? The other side is my alternative community thinks I test too much. They think I'm too standard of care. So I'm like, I'm screwed either way, right? So I'm used to that. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, I'll just live in this place of the balance, which is also, I'm a Libra. And so I'm like always about building the bridge too, because there is a time and a place. So for instance, let's talk about chemo for just a moment. Chemo, right? It is by default, by nature, this is the job of it, is to kill things. Yes. Is to stop cell proliferation, is this to cytotoxically reduce. That's its job. So, and it's non-discerning as to what it's going to kill. We've applied it for the past 70 years in this process known as maximum tolerated dose. So basically take as much as you can possibly tolerate without dying. Yeah. That's what you need to do to fight this back. I was just on a conversation the other day with Dr. Greg, who is a PhD, part of Moffitt and University of Utah, that is so big into like the mathematic algorithms of choosing clinical decision making, but also using this adaptive approach, meaning just push back enough so that the rest of the body can swoop in and do her job or his job. Right, or
so wake up the immune system or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like harness what's there. And so those are the things. So now when I look at chemotherapy, I know that we have technologies today, including ones that are insurance covered, FDA approved insurance covered or insurance reimbursable, tissue assays and blood biopsies that will tell me exactly what conventional therapies will target this individual's cells. Like, why the F are we not using that across the board? A lot of these big academic institutions are, but they don't do anything with the information. They still go back and default to standard of care. We're going to start here. And when you fail that treatment, we'll go to this one. And when you fail that treatment, we'll go to this one. And then when you fail that treatment, then we'll go back and look at that tissue assay from 6 months, 2 years, 4 years ago, which is now totally wipe your ass irrelevant. Yeah. Right? Throw it in the garbage because you've already changed the environment. That tumor is no longer the same tumor it was at the first biopsy.
And you've done so much damage, like you've nuked
the
body.
Common sense, right? You do not have to be an oncologist to see the insanity of this. Whereas, wouldn't it be cool if we started with target, like understand the person's personal, like we talk about personalized medicine, F that. It's such BS. It's such paper only. It's not reality, right? Because the insurance companies are dictating the system, the model does not allow for us to do an N of one approach to care unless you decide to fully go out of the box and pay full on cash for it, which most people don't have that ability to do so. So those, if the perfect world is I would get your tissue or blood biopsy or both. So if I have both, even more, because what's in circulation and what's at the tumor or original site are often different. And the tumor itself is often different. There's heterogeneity there. So you can have a lot of different personalities of the tumor and what's in circulation. That information helps me. Your single nucleotide polymorphisms help me understand like the propensities, like your high penetrance gene risk, your dietary lifestyle, the way you methylate or detoxify, to know how you're meeting the world around you and how it's meeting you. And then from that, I can also look at your pharmacogenomics to know, okay, you've got the DYPD gene. So therefore the folate inhibiting drugs you're looking at taking have extreme toxicity, often debilitating. So let's see if we can either find a different drug or let's work with supporting the toxicity of this drug. Maybe you need to start at 1/10 of the dose versus a 75% of the dose, right? So those are the things. And then what's really cool is we use a concept known as metronomic chemo, which is fractionated or super low dose. When you take the right chemo, you lower it to a 10% of its original amount that you would give, and you stack it with other cytotoxic therapies, such as being in a state of fasted or stacking with hyperbarics or high dose IVC or other, even off-label drugs to help its penetrance into the cancer. You lower the toxicity to all the healthy cells and you direct it like a Trojan horse right into the cancer cells. It's the coolest thing. And if you do it chronobiologically, you can then know the exact cell cycle of your cancer to know when you should even be employing the chemotherapy. So you could actually go home with a backpack with a port that at 3 a.m. is when your cell phase, your S phase of your cancering process is at its most active, and you deliver the chemotherapy in a bolus at that time.
Wow.
That is the future of medicine. And we're already doing that.
But it's already in existence. Like,
is
to
already
your point, the fact that it's not standard of care is shocking.
You have to go pay for that, and you're using 1/10 of it.
Well, and then your insurance company is paying $1 bajillion for the approved.
Yeah. That's getting our patients nowhere. Right. Yeah. So those are the clues. Like, so when I say I am pro building a bridge, it's about, I can make standard of care work better. I can upgrade it. I can modify it, and I can make it work better. And I know what vetted tools I can stack with it to do so. And I know what tools to bring on to, first of all, evaluate that patient to see what support they need and give that patient a high quality of life during the actual treatment phase, but also increase their ability to stay in remission or to stay in a maintenance for as long as possible. And so that's the part that standard of care has nothing on survivorship. They have nothing on multiple drug resistance, and they have nothing on maintenance, and they have nothing on prevention. So all three of those I completely sandwich around, and I have the ability to really support a patient while they're actually in the treatment phase, whether they chose a standard of care in its full glory or a modified version or even a completely alternative version altogether. Because the other side of the coin is the patients who refuse standard of care. They're just as fucking nuts as people who just do standard of care, in my mind.
I love you.
And I'm going to get a lot of haters for this because
but it's finding the middle ground.
It is. And if you're a stage 3 or 4 and you think you can juice this away, you are delusional and dangerous to yourself and others. And the influencers out there suggesting this to be the case, they're a danger. Because there are ways that if you have a high Ki-67 cancer proliferation score, there is no way some of the tools in my toolbox are going to be enough from the alternative side. But when hopefully people now hear that you can do chemo or radiation or surgery or targeted therapies or endocrine disrupting therapies or immune therapies differently, better, individualized, healthier, without side effect, to both hit that cancering process while simultaneously building up the healthy tissue around it, that is the home run.
That's it.
When you are either or, you limit yourself.
And I know 2 people who are dead because of that.
Yeah, it's hard,
right? Because they went hardcore.
Yeah,
alternative.
Well, what happens is oftentimes we get hardcore in whatever we're doing standard of care, we get hardcore and we're like, well, you just need more standard of care. That's what the oncologist will do. That's what happens in the alternative care too. Oh, you just need more of X, Y, or Z. And then you get the people who then hate on the people who weave together the best of both worlds. So that's where I get stuck.
But that makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
Just makes no sense. Because what you're doing is you're taking the best of all worlds. Like, how is that not right? Like you're saying, okay, you know what, oncology world, you've been doing research, you've been hard at work for a really long time. Let's see what you got.
Exactly.
And then let's put it together
through a different lens. Let's apply it in a different way. And the crazy thing is, what is so different, what people don't understand is when we jump on just the standard of care track or just the alternative track, we're following protocols that have nothing to do with who we are and nothing to do with who we are in that moment. So if you've actually tested and assessed and know exactly where you are, guess what? There are plenty of times when standard of care interventions are never needed. But I don't make that assessment. I don't guess ever. I get that information up front to know. So when I do have a patient who comes to see me who were like a stage 2, who went it alone at home, juicing it away, yoga-ing it away, which nothing wrong with those tools, just don't lean on them as the wholehearted, but they never tested. And when we look back at their pathology, we realize you had a very high Ki-67 score. You had a certain mutation, like maybe a KRAS or a BRAF or a HER2 presentation that makes for really vigorous recurrence and progression potential, just kind of cells that go rogue. You needed more, right? And so no wonder now you're coming to me with the stage 4.
Yeah.
Just like those patients who do have, let's say, a triple negative breast cancer, considered very aggressive in standard of care. And standard of care throws everything, including the kitchen sink. And now I'm seeing those patients months or years later with stage 4 after doing everything that standard of care told them. And when I go back and look at the system and evaluate, we realize they had a low Ki-67 score. They started their treatment with elevated levels of insulin. They started their treatment with a poor neutrophil lymphocyte ratio or an elevated C-reactive protein, which meant they were poor prognosis of having drug resistance and potential of cancer cell mutation. So basically, standard of care created a whole new, more aggressive thing. So my point is I want to show people both sides of the coin. If you do not test, assess each individual where they are and adjust accordingly, you will not have as good of outcomes as you could have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shoosh.
Whew. Okay. That was intense. That was awesome.
Hit juice happening now.
I love it. I love it. And I'm looking at the time because you told me you had to be somewhere in 7 minutes and I want to keep talking, but I think we're just going to have to talk again.
Okay.
Because wow, it took us a long time to make this happen and I'm so grateful we finally did.
Yes.
So on that note, on the take the best of all worlds note, find someone who will work with you and not the system or, whatever. Where can people learn more about the work that you do, the practitioners you've trained, because you're only one person? Yes. I know that, you've got a big universe in front of you. So, and you're out there sharing the news. You're out there informing and teaching people that there's this way. So the brilliance, the triple brilliance of you, there's all the brilliance of you, but then the brilliance of you to actually take the time and the resources to train other doctors and practitioners to do what you do so that you can impact so many lives. So first of all, there's the Metabolic Approach to Cancer is the book.
Yep.
You got to have it.
Thank you.
But tell people where they can find you and learn more.
Sure.
And your practitioners.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it because we do need help. This is, 1 in 2 of us will experience cancer in our lifetime. World Health Organization understands that we'll have global doubling of cancer rates by 2040. This isn't going away, right? We can't Pollyanna this away. We need help. And we need help with people who are thinking outside the box because the current box is clearly not working, right? And so at this point, we have between clinicians and allied healthcare providers, we have over 600 trained in 36 countries. And just to give you an example, that seems like a lot, but last month alone, we had 35,000 people come to our directory looking for someone to help them on this journey.
Wow.
That's
you need
really
more.
A lot more. So if you're a clinician listening to this or an allied health provider who is really called to joining this and learning a lot of things we talked about today and applying this and being part of our network and helping us change this narrative globally, go to mtih.org, Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health.org. That's where you'll see the directory of people who've come through our training. But you'll also see you'll see the information about the next cohorts. We do 2 cohorts a year of both of these trainings. The book that Natalie mentioned, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, there's links for that. You can get them all places. You can also get my book, Mistletoe and the Future of Integrative Oncology, that really does talk about what's on the horizon and some of the really best vetted alternative therapies that are out there. So it kind of flips the coin and talks about what is kind of legit if you're out there seeking this. And then I just launched last year a podcast that I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal Natalie to be a guest on, which is called Metabolic Matters. So you can go and have a listen to some of the incredible conversations that I've been blessed to have there. You can also just like follow us on what we're up to. I travel. Natalie and I get to be on a stage together soon in London, but I get to go and meet incredible innovators in medicine and healthcare in general, and people who are just as passionate as I am about changing the narrative of healthcare. They may not be cancer centric, but we're all certainly aware of the terrain and then what's needed to move the dial in true prevention and treatment and wellness creation.
Thank you. And the only other thing I'll add to that is the intent. Don't forget about the intangibles, folks. It's not just nuts and bolts. Like I think that's where the P&I comes in. That's where, the magic mushroom rocket ride you went on comes in. Not that we're saying you need to do that, but that just happened to be her journey.
Oy vey. Yeah.
Oy vey is right. So, Nasha, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for getting curious instead of freaking out.
Thank you, my dear.
So much. It's been great.